One important area of the body to be very mobile in is the ankle, and specifically ankle dorsiflexion. A lot of the movements we do in the gym, a lot of movements we do in sport will require ankle dorsiflexion, which is essentially driving the knee over the toe. If you find that you're very restricted, very tight in your ankle, like it's very immobile, you're going to find that it will restrict your movements and could potentially put you at risk of getting an injury down the line, because it means that your knee, your foot, somewhere has to pick up the slack for a very immobile ankle. Now, one of the things we want to do straight away before we actually get into the drill is assess our ankle capsule, and specifically we want to try and see if we're getting closing angle pain when we go into dorsiflexion. If we are getting closing angle pain, I'm going to be doing another video on how to address this. But first, let's go into that assessment and look at the drill that I have in mind. So first thing to do when assessing that sort of closing angle pain or assessing the ankle capsule in dorsiflexion is essentially just a very basic knee to the wall test. So we're going to get down in this half kneeling position. We're going to get our foot and toes nice and close to what would be like, I've got obviously a box, you can do this against the wall. I'm just going to drive my knee over my toes and try to keep my heel down on the ground. And from here, very easy to obviously do so for me. I want to find essentially what point I go and drive my knee over my toe, and I can't get any further. And I'm essentially trying to assess what's the restrictor of range of motion. So when I get into a position like this, I can't get my knee any closer to the wall. And essentially what I'm trying to assess here is, am I being restricted by the tissue on what would be considered the opening side of the joint? Here at the back of the calf, I've got my soleus muscle, my gastroc. Or have I got a restriction on the front side of the ankle? And specifically, it's more down to do with the joint. So here, if I've got a blocking sensation, or I just feel like I can't go any further, or if I'm just not getting a stretch sensation, then it's likely that you have a bit of closing angle pain and there's a restriction in the capsule. So as I said, I'll be doing up another video on how to address this. But for argument's sake, let's say you've done this test and you find that you're just getting a bit of a stretch on the back side of the calf, which is perfect. So what we're going to be doing is something called PAILs and rails in ankle dorsiflexion, and I'm going to show you a very good setup so that we can get a little bit of leverage and sort of get the most from the stretch. So essentially, let's just explain what the stretch position is going to be at first. We're essentially going to prop ourselves up on an elevated surface, something like a bench, a hard surface, a chair, something sturdy that you can kind of put a bit of weight into. This box is perfect for me here. So I'm going to try and get a lot of my body weight over the ankle, and I'm essentially driving my knee over my toe, okay? In order to find the stretch initially, we want to make sure a few things happen, okay? One thing that should happen is essentially like the arch of my foot should collapse a little bit, and that will sort of bring my ankle into a little bit of eversion, okay? And in doing so, this allows for, when we look at our ankle mechanics, this actually allows for a greater amount of dorsiflexion. That rotation has to happen in the foot, the arch has to collapse for me to actually get better dorsiflexion. If I'm trying to grip too much and essentially like raise my arch up too much, I know it can be a good cue for squatting and stuff like that, but here I actually want to allow it to drop and actively stretch what would be the underside of my foot along with my soleus, okay? In terms of getting the stretch then from here, if I have something I can kind of grab onto, like for here, I can sort of grab onto the opposite side of the box, pull myself in further, and just essentially get a greater stretch on the ankle. I'm going to sit here for anywhere close to sort of 2 minutes. This means that the tissue that I'm actually getting a stretch on is going to respond to the stretch. I'm going to really focus on my breathing. I'm going to try and inhale, and then I'm going to try and exhale and relax, making my exhale probably twice as long as my inhale. That means that my nervous system is going to stop ramping up and it's actually going to ramp down. It's going to allow me access to the tissue. Now, if I had that closing angle pain, I'd probably find that I'm not really getting much of a stretch. I'm just sort of exacerbating the pain, maybe even making it worse, and not getting that good stretch that I should actually be finding on the back side of the calf. Now, this is the first part of the drill. We're then going to go into what I mentioned earlier called a PAILs rails contraction. So it stands for progressive angular isometric loading and regressive angle isometric loading. As I was saying with the opening and closing pain, it's kind of a reference to those two things. Isometric loading just means that I'm going to contract the muscle, but I'm not technically going to move. The PAILs, rails, progressive, regressive just stands for in what direction I'm actually going to perform that contraction. So when I'm in this position, I can perform the contraction in two different directions. I can try and gas pedal with my foot, essentially contract everything on the opening side of the joint, what I'm feeling a stretch on, or I can contract on the regressive side. I can contract everything on the front side of my shin to pull me deeper into the stretch. So you don't have to know the exact sort of acronym or what it is, just know the intent of what I mean when I say PAILs and rails. Okay, so I'd sit in that stretch for about 2 minutes. Before I do any sort of PAILs, rails work, I need to make sure that I'm irradiating. Now, irradiating is a reference to creating tension in the body to give me a more solid position and to amplify my strength. Now, from here, when I start that PAILs contraction, remember it's an isometric. I'm not moving, I'm just contracting in a certain direction. I'm gonna start off at 1%. I'm gonna feel everything on this opening side begin to create tension and start to essentially push down into the box like I'm gas pedaling down. Specifically, it's plantar flexion because I'm in a very end range position of dorsiflexion. So when I'm creating that tension, I'm slowly but surely ramping it up. I'm thinking of it like a volume meter. I'm trying to just build and build with every second that goes by, and I'm gonna build up to what's considered a greatest, safest max effort. This is a point where I can create the most amount of tension with all of these muscles that are getting a stretch, and I'm trying to really ramp up to what would be considered a max effort, as high as I can, close to 100%. I'll do that for about 30 seconds. I'll probably take about 15 to 20 seconds to get to that max effort, and then I'll hold that max effort for about 10 seconds. Then straight afterwards, I'm gonna go into the rails contraction. I just performed my PAILs, I go into my rails. Now I start contracting everything on the front side of the shin. I'm actively trying to close that angle, pull my knee deeper into ankle dorsiflexion. Sorry, pull my knee over my toe, pull my ankle into more dorsiflexion, and try to contract everything on the opposite side that wasn't getting a stretch. I'm gonna do that for about 20 seconds. The transition needs to be nice and quick, but I'm essentially pulling myself deeper and deeper into the position, irradiating and doing it with the maximum amount of tension I can create. I'll then rest for a period of time. I'm gonna give myself about 40 seconds, 45 seconds to just ramp down. I ramped up by bracing and engaging. I'm gonna ramp down by focusing on my breath, just letting my nervous system ramp down from the effort that I just asked it to do. I'm then gonna go for another one. We're gonna perform 2 rounds of PAILs and rails. Same again on the second one, 30 seconds, gas pedaling down, ramping up as high as I can, holding lots of tension in my body. My rails for 20 seconds, quick transition, pulling in, squeezing everything on the front side of the shin to actively gain more ankle dorsiflexion. Now what you're gonna find at the end of that is certainly that you've not only stretched the tissue, but you've also loaded the tissue. Now you've loaded it with an isometric, which is a great way to begin the initial loading phase of a stretch, because it's not going to be too much for a tissue that we've never got into or we've never had access to. We don't want to start it too quickly with something that it can't handle. So what you'll certainly find after that is you've opened up some range of motion, but the great thing about that is you can probably do that multiple times throughout the week. It doesn't have to specifically go in when you're doing a workout. If anything, I'd probably advise not to do it, because once, as I said, you've opened up tissue, it's probably not best to go loading that tissue straight away if this is a new concept for you. But as I said, if you aren't getting the closing angle pain, if you're finding that stretch on the backside of the tissue, this is going to be a great drill to really open up ankle dorsiflexion. If you give it a go, let me know how you get on with it, if it seems to work for you. If it's not, I'm going to be doing up other videos on some other ways to kind of attack the ankle in terms of actually gaining more range of motion in it. It's a troublesome area for a lot of people, but this is a very basic one to start off with to kind of get some movement into the ankle straight away. All right, let me know how it goes.